right, thank you for coming to, I think, our 22nd or 23rd video here on social work with victims of abuse and creativity and healing and family and healing and all kinds of human domain and healing and creativity. Today's theme is poetry. Now, poetry on the one hand could be thought of as, oh, poetry is something that really fancy middle-class people do in a lovely rec room, or the sort of imagining of the older white guy with the pipe and the tweed suit or something, and he reads you something of Shakespeare or something like
contemplates that. Contemplates the meaning of life.
The meaning of life. And
so Aristotle,
yeah, lots of dead white guys. Yeah. So what I want to talk about is something completely different than that in many, many ways. So I would say, and many indigenous people would say too, that, and others, but indigenous people in particular for the moment, I'll comment on that, that if you can put things in a way that people can hear in a nice way, they're going to remember it better. And I take this moment to talk about indigenous ways in that for centuries and centuries, some indigenous groups communicated to the future through song and story. And song and story are poem. Right? A story could be a really long poem, right? Yep. A song is a poem with music. That's all, right? So rather than having libraries the way many settler folk had, we would have libraries, we would have tomes of wisdom, we would have shelves with text, right? Indigenous people might have had 50 songs or 5,000 songs or 5,000 poems or stories because it was an oral tradition. So when you're making things that are oral lessons and you want people to remember them, you try to make them have a little bit of a sing-songiness to it, or certain kind of rhyme or rhythm or something that made it more catchy so it could be held in the mind. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to say that's what poetry is. I would say also right now we see a lot of young people using hip-hop, and hip-hop is a poetry with a lot of jumpy and boomy, let's say, added. Right? So poetry for me, I grew up in a kind of white bush trash context where there weren't a lot of books around and poetry and those kinds of, I didn't get to go to plays or, because we lived rural and we lived poor. Versus some people who grew up in New York, there's plays, there's all kinds of creative, there's art galleries, there's museums. Some of that cultural richness, let's say, wasn't available to me. But in my early teens, I started discovering poetry and really feeling, well, that was helpful. That helped me get through a day, or that helped me put an idea in an organized way, reading other people's poetry. And I'll go backwards a little bit. I would say to you that even Dr. Seuss, who was, I suppose, the first love of my life, Dr. Seuss and Cat in the Hat and all that, his writing could be thought of as like poetry. He taught you the playfulness and joy that can exist with imaginative images for little children, right? So somewhere through all that, I started discovering poetry, and I started writing poetry. I published my first poem in a socialist magazine called Canadian Dimension, and it was about poverty, and they published it, and I felt very proud of that. And that was when I was 24. Since then, and I'm almost 60, I have published in different journals and books and contexts, and I've also come to own my own way of writing. Sometimes for some issue, I'll think about it in jail for a while, and then I'll write a hate poem or a sad poem or some poem, and then I can figure out how to write a scholarly article. I, in effect, will write the scholarly article about the poem, or in some cases now, the last 8 years or so, about the painting. And you've witnessed me in the recent past show you some kind of image and then tell you the story of the image, right? So I throw that out there just to make the point that some people will have their own way of learning and expressing. There isn't one standard way. We've talked about that with all the other stories and issues and intersectionality and everything about every time you work with victims of abuse, every victim is their own unique story. We can be experts on patterns, but not on any individual person. And today I'm talking about the pattern of creative writing, of poetry, of listening to poetry, listening to music, which I'll say is kind of a poem, right? For many people, that helps them heal. If you say to them at somewhere in your process of working with them, tell me what kind of music you like, and they say, oh, country music, and they, oh, among all the country music singers, who do you admire most? Tell me about what songs have real potency and resonance for you. And they may say, oh, there's these sad songs, and every time I hear them, it helps me cry, and I have a good cry, and then I feel better in the morning, right? So you're looking to see what has been an effective resource for them in the past, and then amplifying it, right? Listening to music, or writing, and or both. So the first group that I was part of was this group, and we published a book called Battle Chant. And this is a group of other women in the community I used to live in, who we were making these creative writing circles. We would meet, I can't remember for sure, but let's say twice a month or once a week. And after a little while, we realized, hey, we've got some pretty cool creative writing here. And we put together this tiny little book. It's called Battle Chants. I'll read from the back of it. And the quote that we put at the back on the top is, couldn't we speak together now as women in a circle, knee to knee to knee? We could nod once the words had stopped and say, oh, now I see, now I understand, in a circle with women, right? So that turned out to be a very important part of it. And we were delighted to have this first publication. And then we also had the opportunities to read from our publication at different events and fundraisers and so on. So I'm going to make a little kind of structure here as I talk. So poetry, and you can make one word of poetry, music, hip-hop, that's like creative expression with words. But I'll keep using the word poetry. Poetry can be about self-care, expressing your feelings in a way that are wholesome and good and satisfying for you. Poetry can be about reading other people's poetry and having a sense of, I'm not alone in the world. Somebody else has had these feelings of sadness or badness or madness or whatever. Poetry can be about fundraising. So being invited, as since this came out, I think, let's see what year that was, 1999. We published this book in 1999. So since then, I've read poetry at maybe 80 events. Take Back the Night, International Women's Day, December 6 morning ceremonies. I get invited to read as part of the people on the podium or the fundraiser. So I've been invited to read poetry at as part of Pride Week events, the Laramie Project. Before the movie went on, or the documentary or whatever, we read poetry, and people had paid to get into this event, and the money is for a good cause. I've read poetry at a cancer place to raise money for cancer. So poetry, creative expression, can be part of offering your service, your feelings to a larger group. It can be about group solidarity too. So when I read those poems at those kind of events, I'm saying to the people in the audience, we are not alone in this. You're not alone. You've been sexually abused, but 1 in 3 women has been sexually abused. You're not alone, and here's a story or a poem from me who's been abused and who's landed on my feet. And then another dimension of poetry is public education. So when I read at a Take Back the Night, I'm helping other people who may not have had that same experience to learn about what it's like to have that experience. So this book came out in 1999. Subsequent to that, I was involved with some of the same people in this book, Stressful Sisterhood. And we published this, and this was a self-publishing collective. So we each put in some money, we create the book, we each get some books that we can then sell or donate to causes or give as gifts. Stressful Sisterhood. In this one, there are 5 authors, and this came out in 2001. And again, all of those purposes, each of us grew and had self-care from creating our writing in here, from sharing in circles. It's a potential fundraiser, so to donate when there's a fundraiser for some cause and they say, could anybody make donations for door prizes, whatever, I'll always donate some books. Group solidarity and public education. Stressful sisterhood. The next one was this book called Groping Our Way Beyond Grief, and this one has, again, 5 women, and this has 2 women from the geography I used to live and 3 women from this community. So this was more when I got here. We produced this book of poetry. The next one would have been, Outlaw Social Work. This is myself and 3 other social workers got together when we created this book, and we've written poems in there about what it's like to be a social worker or to do social justice activism. And I'll read some poems from this one, because we're headed towards talking about social work with victims of abuse. And so I'll read, this is one about community and social workers. We want to have the macro level, the community. To you for community. In a previous era, a traditional context, a casual range of smiling gestures created cohesion and unstrangerliness. Then, there, a handful of special seeds from my own garden, a bouquet of roses or lilies, pies, muffins, cookies from homebred recipes, or something hand-knitted or sewn. But I have no yard, I have no ripe food, no oven, no craft. I only have fresh, precious words, portable, common, nutritious, compostable, and unstore-bought. So nodding, hand held out, I offer these small poems in neighborliness. So that's a perfect poem for me to read at a strike. I read that at strikes when I'm there as a support person for a strike. This is a poem about my grandpa. Finally, 89 years he's been alive, born with not much, lived with not much, loved Gram quietly and much, worked, kept life tidy, obtainable, often tells of a boss's story about how important it is to save every day a dollar each pay. He never forgets, and he always did. Proud that he did a new thing and excited, he tells me a friend gave him goose eggs. He'd never eaten them before, and he likes them. He laughs at poetry, fool's ways to waste time, no pay for that. But tonight, about poems published about him, he said he understands and he likes them. It's good we've both lived this long, to have obtained this much newness between us. Saved, tidy, important, well kept, likable, worth being proud of. So my grandpa worked in the mines all his life. This is my mother's father. We were very loving towards each other, and 89 years old, he was still learning things. This poem could be thought of as a resistance against ageism, the idea that after 89, how could you learn? He was learning how to cook goose eggs, and he was learning from me about poetry. So I felt that was worth saving in a poem. I thought that was a lovely moment between us. Read you another one or two from this book. This is for one of my cats. And so we've had some cats appear in the videos today and yesterday. This is the therapist, and this is for Meep. He's a cat who lives with me for a very long time. He was one of my most heartfelt little loves. For this therapist, you protected confidentiality, you saw through pretensions, you insisted you be loved, whimsically demanded attention, torn holes in what you didn't approve of, and you escaped rooms and cages just to prove your intelligence. Because of our 14 years together, the indisputable vulnerability of an unsupervised cotton sock, an unprotected Kleenex box, or gloves hanging precariously from a coat's pocket, melancholies my morning. plastic bags or backpacks. You will never again move about with the moody force of your inquiring pause. The sink's empty of your silly bottom today. I gaze at your unwarm pillow as I fall asleep or awaken. The most barren moment, though, when I arrive home and touch only silence because your Siamese weird voice, your silky furred big self, is gone. That's kind of a memorial poem. He would steal socks and tear holes in them, and so I've kind of listed his bad behaviors, but then after he died I missed him chewing holes in my socks and stuff like that. So that's a poem just about us for self-care. Let's see if I can find one that is... Okay, this is about swearing. And we've talked in a previous video about being white bush trash. I kind of feel this is part of my cultural heritage. This is part of my culture, my language, my way of being. And also, it's part of our way, often as white bush trash folk or oppressed folk, that you work your anger through. You swear and stomp your feet and then you get on with your day. Because sometimes that's all you have is to swear. My filthy, dirty mouth, I employ and apply obscenities often to be naughty, to shock, to alert, to frighten, to defend, to engage, to display authentic working class trailer trash cultural heritage. It's one of the few natural resources that's my own, that I've been allowed to keep, that goes everywhere with me, because this defies gender rules, because this makes students listen more closely, because this makes my professional peers nervous. But mostly expressions like shit, pissed off, fucked, effectively, accurately, substantively describe realities around me. And until there are no excrements or violations somewhere in my environment, I will rely on stinky, ugly swear words. So now you know what you can do with your shame, your whitewash, and your soap. Because that expression, I'll wash those dirty words out of your mouth. Well, fuck you. You will not. Those are my words.
Joke's on my mom. I liked the taste of soap.
Well, there you go. Yeah, it's our way. It's our culture, right? I'll read you one more from this book. This is still from Outlaw Social Work. And these are 3 other social workers in this community. 2 males, 1 female, 2 indigenous. And we had these sort of backwards question marks for our front cover, because that's what we often feel like, is a backwards question mark, like, huh? What's going on? So this is about money, I think. It's about, forever blankness, regarding the things we do for cash and need, rather than for our free, frisking creativity. When 19, a shack-sharing Ojibwe boy I'd done drugs with committed suicide. He had more images to sketch than shy words to offer. I've since seen his smarter brother, begging and rancid, gone urban and trashy. Emily Carr had to raise dogs and rooming house tenants. Kafka dragged himself through dreary days administering his father's business. Orwell and Breck did the best they could, day to day. Multitudes of anonymous women quietly married in hopes of having space protected while their children slept or their bread baked. Many men divorced their higher selves and slowly died at the plow or the factory door. 29 jobs, often 2 at a time, burned holes through what might have been. My waitressing burdened 15 years, strapped rage to my back, and I wear it as a weapon, shield, skin stretched. This morning you forward, your bluntly beautiful body, your bad left hip, your sore back, your chainsawed leg, bearing 90 pounds of roofing paper, sweating, smiling, gently forgiving the grinding down world. You have humble desires for nature's cold water, the stub of a pencil, a few cents worth of paper, a warm shirt, wood for fire. This morning I am reading your book of poems and weeping for all the empty canvases and pages, condemned to remain that way. So that's a poem for all the ordinary folk who wanted to read and write poetry, who wanted to paint, who wanted to do something creative, learn to play piano. But they were so poor and they worked full-time and part-time, and they never got to learn how to do those things or be those things. And it's a type of grief that a cultural group can carry. So a group of poor people, a group of oppressed people. I see right now all the people in refugee camps, and I think there's going to be generations of children there who never get to play, who never get to live all the beauty of the human experience, who are trapped and deprived. Maybe there's one more in here about social workers. Okay, this one's about social workers. So, this is none and all. For social work students who imagine they're going to change everything and save everyone. We are mopping floors vigorously, this dirt from cool mud floors, stumbling and dancing while doing undoable somewhat well, being with those who aren't even within themselves, striving for what we know won't be during our thin lives, inquiring about and artfully documenting the absurd, pushing even ourselves, boundaries, and other unevens, trying to get comfortable with discomfort, wearing bold masks, vigor, humor, and more for vital tasks and vital days, trying to do well and be well, while doing undoable sort of well. We are well-wishers in an unwell world. None and all, from Outlaw Social Work. Get the book on Amazon. So some of the other places that I've been involved in doing poetry, when I do these workshops that we've talked about on other topics, I try to always open the event with a little bit of an explanation of who I am and what I'm doing and why I'm there. And I try to open with one poem to kind of give people a feeling or get them in an emotional zone. Another good strategy is maybe also bring that poem. It doesn't have to be your own poem, just a poem. And you could print it out and give it to everybody in the room as a gift, to give them something to kind of get them in the mood, like an appetizer or something to get in the mood.
Could you consider it like a writing prompt for journaling?
A writing prompt for journaling, exactly. It can be all kinds of things in the moment. That's one of the beautiful things about poetry, right? It can be what you wish it to be. If you think of all the cards in all the card shops, like the Hallmark cards and stuff, in a way each of them is a little poem too, on the topic of grief or happy birthday or whatever, right? Good, think of it that way. So one of the next projects I was involved in, I think, was this one, This Ain't Your Patriarch's poetry book. And we were looking for contributors who wanted to write a bit of poetry about patriarchy, kind of speaking back to the mansplainers. And this was published in 2003. And let's see who the contributors are. There are 4 of us. Oh, no, more than 4. There's 4, 8. There's 12 of us in this book. 1 for every month. 1 for every month. And some of them are indigenous, some are settler, some women, some men, different age groups. But they're all kind of social worky, social justicey types. And in this text, we mix some, you two commented on, you saw some pictures of me. I'm wondering what it was. Did you see the picture of me with no clothes on my back? Is that the one that you're...
What?
This. We asked each of the authors to show their vulnerable back.
Okay.
Because we want to protect each other's back. You've heard the expression, I've got your back. I got your back. So we wanted each person to put a picture in here of your back.
Okay.
And Ken took this photo of me at camp. And we chose to use this one because my back was vulnerable, right? I was scared. You know, it's hard when you're working against patriarchy.
Yeah.
Your back is a target, right? So I offer that you can mix your poetry with photography. You can mix poetry with art. You can mix.
It truly is whatever you want it to be.
Whatever you want it to be. It can be all kinds of things. It can be a little poem, long poem, all kinds of things. Another very fun way is if you're facilitating some kind of group and you take some very short poems, if you can find them, and type them all out and crinkle them up, put them in a big bowl, and everybody in the group has to pick one and then read it to the group. And that can be a very fun way or open way or emotive way to start the group to facilitate, get people in a certain headset.
Mm-hmm.
So this Ancient Patriarchs poetry book, that came out next. And then I think the next one was this one. This is the Capilano Review. And I felt very delicious about, my husband has a section in this book, and so do I, and some other sort of northerners. In this one, Unfurled, I have a section in this, collected poetry from northern BC women. So there's poems in there that kind of mostly link with our video on northern rural and social justice activism in those kind of contexts. Here, Care and Consequences, the Impact of Healthcare Reform. So this is something a little bit different. This is a very scholarly book, but the editor asked me if I would write a poem to open the book, and I did. And it's about health and our bodies, and care and the consequences of not getting care. So the other two that I'll talk about here for a minute before we close up this video is this one right here, New Hope. I was sharing with my two colleagues yesterday about New Hope. So I've been invited to go into groups sometimes and help them write collective poems. So the way that this worked, New Hope, I was invited to come in. I went in on Sundays. They have a small little place, basically one big room and a little kitchen area and a bathroom. And it has two entrances, a back and a front. And so I was invited to come in on Sundays while everybody was doing everything they were already doing. So people were walking in and out. It's a place for survival sex trade workers. They can drop in and get donuts and a coffee. They could sit and have a cigarette. They could get condoms. They could get pamphlets or information. It's kind of like a drop-in, catch everything, kind of help them out. Or a place to just be for a little while without being bothered. And I had a flip chart, and I came every Sunday, and I helped them to write poems that express some aspect of their life. And so I would lead them through steps and exercises. So a very common kind of, I feel, everybody right now write down, I feel, what do you feel right now, right? I feel sad. I see gray walls. I hear dark sounds, right? So you lead them through some steps, everybody does that, and then they can give that to me, and I can make it into a group poem, right? And they could also write poems individually, and I'd give it to me, and then I'd help them to structure it a little bit, bring it back the next week, and so on. So in the end, we created this. It's called One New Hope. The organization is called New Hope, and we decided one new hope for each person in the group. They wrote poetry, and so some of the poetry they chose to have be anonymous. Some of them wanted their name or just their first name in the book. And then my memory is we made 100 of these, and each of the women who participated got 10 of them, and they could give those to their friends or neighbors, or they could just have it as a keepsake of this moment in their life. The other thing that we did with these is a few of them got to read them out loud at some kind of an event, and that made them feel very proud of themselves and very, look, I'm a published author. I've got something in a book. And I'm going to read one of the poems that I read to you yesterday to talk about. So this is, if you were working with carpenters and you said, okay, we're going to write a group poem about being a carpenter, they would say things about nails and hammers and plywood and drills and saws. If you were going to work with a group of hairdressers to write a group poem about hairdressing, they would talk about shampoo and conditioner and scissors and stuff like that. So if you're working with a group of sex trade workers, they're going to write about dicks. And so they did. And this is our collective group poem, and I'm going to read you this. Our group poem about dicks. We've been around them, under or above them. We've tried to get away from them, tried to find them. We've tried to figure it out and in and out and in. Do they end where their dicks begin, or vice versa? Or something both more true and less true than that? Cottage cheese dick, eggplant colored, stump stick, warded, sideways banana dick, upside down faucet, elephant foreskinned, smelly infected thick dick, deflated, weak, red, rash, flopsy wopsy, Pussy smelly, drippy, tainted, limp dick. Pencil smart and sharp, smells like his shit dick. Pierced, ingrown haired, gag me dick. Fat, curly, white, dark, old, young, mean, sweet, saluting. Happy fun, party hardy dick. Doing it with his jeans on, pushing against his biting zipper dick. Moaning about his dick. Purple people eater, slick dick. It's not the flick of the prick that does the trick, it's the throb of the knob that does the job. Herpes dick, silent, noisy, scary, squishy dick, fucking funny dicks. I had a guy dry hump me once while he used a cucumber. Easiest date I ever did. Military dick, shy, invading, penetrating, imaginary, spasm, rude, gooey, foreskinned, tiny, silly boy, child dick, suffocating, identifiable, the perfect dick is a woman wearing one. Life dick, death dick, we didn't always see them coming. We've been around them, we've tried to get away from them, we've tried to find them, we've tried to figure them out and in. We're trying to begin again, centered in our juicy selves. We are huge successes in that we can still laugh at dicks coming or going. We can be without any dicks on our horizon, on our beds, in our heads, in our now, and be perfect. Perfectly contented and fulfilled. So that's a poem written by Cy, Diva, Crystal, Hallie Joe, Dee, and others. And that was just on a flip chart. We kept putting the words each week for a few weeks of what does it mean to do the work you do. And I feel so proud of them for participating in this and being who they are and talking about their lives and wishing their lives to be a little bit safer, a little bit braver. I love this organization, New Hope. It exists on like 3 nickels and a dime. It doesn't get very much government funding, if any. Any given year is a little different. And Crystal Kapuscinski, who, by the way, has a master's degree now in social work, is one of the participants in this. I love that Crystal's got a really good life and built a good future for herself. But what I also find really, really powerful and memorable about this poem is I've read this at a conference of, let's say, 100 social workers in a room or 50 medical professionals in a room. And they may never have really thought about what is the day-to-day life of a street-level sex trade worker in Prince George. What's it like for them, right? Mm-hmm. So this is from their words, what it's like to be them on that one topic. And I was like, whoa, right? That's social work, doing work with victims of abuse. We can make the assumption that all of these women have been abused. Either they were abused as kids, or they were abused yesterday, or they're abused in terms of poverty, violence, the economic world, all the ways we've talked about poverty of imagination, poverty of opportunity, of hope, all these things. And so I applaud this group too, that they had this one spot. One of the women brought her dog all the time, and the dog would be running back and forth, and sometimes 1 or 2 women would bring their kid, and their kid would be running back and forth. And a room about as big as this, that's all that it is one big room with a door there and a door there and some food. So it's not a very lush or extravagant space, but they made it feel kind of lush and extravagant in that they were comradely with each other, and I felt very privileged to be invited. So I would offer you, this is the kind of project, let's say, you could do with an oppressed group. You could do this with a group of rainbow youth coming to explore their own sexuality and identity in their bodies. You could use this format and then give them each their copies of the book. And you could use it to educate people who may not know of that world. Now this is another one, Unruled Performances, and this is a chapbook, and it's one that I've read at many contexts. This is about aging, and it's about being a survivor of sexual abuse in my childhood. The casual pleasures of aging well. 2 of the 3 buildings in which the sexual abuse occurred are gone now. 1 burned years ago. Recently, the 2nd building got ripped down, replaced by a massive modern structure. The 3rd now exists for different purposes. All the squares of dirt are owned by different hands. Not forgiving, not forgetting, acknowledging and monitoring through distance and detachment. No one did or would talk back then. Reports to Children's Aid went nowhere. And all this was before the invention of cyber porn, or I might have had hard evidence, corroborating testimony from co-victims. It's hard to be certain of the numbers. It depends on where you set your perimeters. But 2 out of the worst of my offenders are dead. 1 of a heart attack, 1 eaten by cancer. Maybe more have died. I know 1 is in the clutches of a chronic illness. I can't know everything. My life is too full now of joy, learning, going forward, and educating others. So that again is a poem. That's a true story poem. That's an actual, I call them docu-poems when it's a poem exactly from true life. So the poem from the survival sex trade workers, for example, that's a docu-poem, a documentary poem, true life. All the women in that room lived those words. They lived those experiences and feelings. I lived this, right? So those kind of poems, again, when you use that to educate people, it is really, really effective versus showing them a bunch of statistics. They kind of go, right? Or they go, yeah, right? But when you can sometimes capture people's hearts, their emotions, before their intellect or their cognitive schema shuts you down or shuts you out, it's a good thing.
Wasn't it just that, like, appealing to their emotions is more, I guess, is it more conducive to an open mind?
Yes, and to change, right? So people think, oh, all those sex trade workers are just sluts. They're just bad people. They're just, awful, right? No, they're the daughters, sisters, mothers. They're the friends and neighbors. They all are exactly like you in all kinds of ways.
And poetry is just finding a common humanity.
Yeah, a common humanity. Well said. A common compassion, right? The religious, there but for the grace of God go I, right? They're the same as anybody else in the world, except they've had some real tough moments, and then they had no choices. They felt, okay, the only way I can make some money is do this, and they do this. For whatever the reasons are, who am I to judge? It's not my business to judge, right? So those are very good things to share. I thought I had one more here. Did I bring down one that had a pink cover? I guess not, eh? So I guess I'll just leave it at that for now. That in summary, poetry is the same as music, is the same as hip hop, is the same as oral storytelling. Sometimes, some ways, it can be self-care. So for the people who are writing it themselves, it's a way for them to build their courage, clarify their thinking. It can be a useful and potent way to share in a circle or a group, like the survival sex trade workers were sharing their own poems and their own stories with each other and with me. It can be a fundraiser. So a fundraiser either in the product can be sold and it can help some group to further their cause, or it can be a fundraiser at a fundraiser for cancer. 5 different poets could read their poetry, 1 person sings some songs, and then they all have a meal, and people pay $50 to go to that event. And then you've raised some money, right? So more than once I've been part of that and felt really proud of myself. Like, that is so great. Last night they raised $4,000 for cancer, and I was part of that. Oh yeah, right? Oh yeah, that feels good. It can also be group solidarity. So reading poetry at a Take Back the Night march or a protest or a rally or a strike. And it can be public education. I'll tell you, the media, if you say, oh, we're going to have some people standing at a podium on Friday and they'll read some statistics, the media's not going to care. They're not going to come to that as likely as if you say, we're going to have poetry, we'll have some singers, we'll have some dancers, we'll have some cultural events, and a couple stats. We'll throw in some statistics. Oh, okay, right? So if you can blend all of that, and as you said, it opens people's soul to connect, the media will come for that, right? And then it will be on the 6 o'clock news, or it will be on page 3 of the newspaper. And they even, along the way, I've gone to events and I've brought copies of the poems I'm going to read, and I've given them to the media people, and they've quoted a couple lines from them in the newspaper or on the news, and I'm like, yeah, right? You feel, again, if you just say, oh, 1 in 3 women sexually abused, well, they know that, and that's been true for 20, 30, 50 years. That's not news, right? But if 5 poets each read their poetry, and they've got a new book of poetry, and in one of the poems it says 1 in 3, bam, you got in, you got your data into the world again, right? So poetry for me has been a great, great medicine, both reading it and writing it and sharing it. And of course, the love of my life, my husband with his 8 books of poetry. Oh, I met him at a poetry reading, and we read poetry at many events. So it can be a place where you develop comradeship and bonds with other people too. The other people on those podiums have been some of my best friends and some of my best colleagues. And you know, you hug at the event at the end of the gig, and you just feel like, well, I may not see you for another year, but boom, 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 my heart beats with you.
Next creativity night.
Yeah, like creativity night. Yeah, that's another example. Yeah. Thank you again for hanging out with us. Thank you, Tuba, for being our Steven Spielberg. Thank you, Carlene, for being my companion here in these conversations. Thank you to the students who sign up. Yippee-ki-yay.